Okay, so what I've done now is show you the process for the scanning, making a 3D scan with the Trunnio app. So I start with Trnio, open the app. The home screen here shows me all the scans that I've made before. What I want to do is kind of go into this camera mode and make sure that I'm in AR Toolkit. And then I basically press record down here, this little record circle button, and move around the object. So I want to make sure that I move around it kind of in a 360 degree from more or less kind of shoulder height is where I stop. Make a little detour here. But generally speaking, I kind of make a pass around all the way around the object, as close to 360 degrees around the object as I can, shoulder height. And then I'll go in and kind of fill in like details where I want details. So for instance, here, like I'll go in at a little bit lower of an angle so that the app starts kind of making these 3D locators. And you can see all those little blue dots now are these like 3D positional locators that start, again, filling in the kind of relational data. So specifically, you can see here, you know, as I either kind of move into new territory or as I move the phone around in this kind of three-dimensional pass, it starts creating more relationships, right, between the objects, and kind of it will allow the Trnio kind of processor to make a much more detailed image. And then obviously you can kind of see you have the option of making these public. I think I've probably have my privacy settings turned up pretty high. But then it goes into this uploading image, and it uploads the images to the server, and then will process those images and stitch them back together. Okay, so I'm going to, this is going to run through the 3D scanning and import process and then packaging for New Art City using GLTF file format, which is a file format that takes 3D scans and packages them with a bunch of like image textures and any animations and other kind of data files into one file. So I just finished the scan on Trnio. I'm going to insert a little screen record of just sending that file over using AirDrop to my computer. Okay, so let me just kind of narrate what's going on here. So this is the Trnio. So when you open Trnio, you can see all of your scans that you've made. I clicked into the, let me kind of go back here. So I clicked into tapped this scan of my living room. And then when I tapped into that scan, then I get this preview that I can kind of, move around the screen, rotate around with my finger. And then I click in the upper right-hand corner here, the share button. And then that it gave me options to share with this 3D mesh, an OBJ file, Sketchfab. I chose the 3D mesh, the OBJ file. And then I get some options, right? So you can email it to yourself or whatever. I just used AirDrop to send it directly to my computer. And that's where we kind of leave off. And I'm going to jump back into showing you what happened from my computer. And then this is kind of what came out. It's actually like a zip file with a default kind of temporary name that was just a bunch of letters and numbers, but I've turned it into this folder. And so you have a material file, which kind of sits in between the geometry. So this is the geometry file. And it's just, there's no, color data. And then this material file sits in between that 3D model and then these image texture files, which are taken from the photographs that kind of wrap around the geometry. And this just basically tells it like what the map is, like where to go for the color data and where to put it on the geometry. So what we're going to do is import the geometry file itself into Blender, and then Blender will know, since all of these files are in this folder together, Blender will know to look for these files. hopefully. So first things first, we're going to delete everything in our scene. When you open up Blender for the first time, you get a light, this default cube, and a camera. We don't need any of it, so I'm going to hit A on my keyboard to select all, X, and then delete. I'm going to go into File, and then Import, and I'm going to import my OBJ file. And I'm going to go look for that in my downloads. And I have two options. I want to choose, again, that .obj, that's the geometry file. Blender's going to have a little thing. All right, so now I can kind of rotate around my file. I see like it's come in with some really interesting kind of rotational data. So I'm just going to select or keep the object selected as is, and I'm going to use this kind of rotate tool over here and just kind of try to rotate it so that it's more or less flat-ish, because it's going to copy the rotation into our final output. The other thing that I notice is that it's kind of like rotating around the corner, and I don't really want that. I want it to kind of rotate from the center of the object. So I'm going to zoom out a little bit so you can kind of see what I'm doing. I'm using my trackpad, which I kind of don't normally do. So let's see if I can remember. Yeah, Shift and 2 fingers on a Mac anyway to pan. I want this little rotational object to be more or less kind of centered on my piece here. So I'm going to say Object and then Snap. I'm going to say Cursor to Geometry. Apply. Set Origin. Set Origin to Geometry. There we go. So now it's kind of more or less in the kind of center of this object. And then I can go into, if I get those little crosshairs up in the upper right hand corner, I can split my screen, and I can go do that again, and I can say view, camera, viewport, sorry. I can say front, and then I can say view, viewport, right, and that gives me a right side view. So now I can tell kind of like I'm actually upside down here in this view, which is always good, you know, to double check here. So I'm going to just kind of flatten that out, and then I can use the translate tool, or G on my keyboard for grab, select the object, and G for grab, and then I can kind of retranslate, or I can use these like arrows, these little handles. So that looks pretty good. I mean, it's, you know, it's a funky scan. All right, so now it's all oriented the way that I like it to be. I'm going to shut those windows, and you can do that by just grabbing the little crosshair again and dragging it. You get like arrows. You can see that it will collapse back, and that just gives me more real estate in my 3D viewport. Up here in the upper right hand corner, these are our default views. So this is all the geometry. You can tell it's a really complex model. So before we upload, we might want to reduce the polygon count. I'm going to check to see where we are just using this data as is. But it's a really detailed model. Amazing 3D scan. Or this is our kind of default, just like, you know, shader, and then this is our material shader, this third one over, and that should connect us back to our image data. So this is now the material file connecting those JPEG images back. So that looks pretty good. And then this last tab over is our rendering viewport. We're using WebGL with NewArt City. If we want to use some other kind of, you know, rendering format, we might want to use that, but that is like the Blender would have to do like a lot of physics calculations, light bounce passes, and we'd have to add lights and yada yada. For our purposes, we're just going to use the kind of default lighting environment, so I'm not going to mess around with the rendering node. All right, so I'm just going to export this as is. So for this, you want to make sure that you have I'm going to say export as a GLTF, and I don't know, there it is, GLTF 2.0. I don't think by default that's checked off, so it's in one of our add-ons. So I'm just going to show you how to do that. It's under Edit, and then Preferences, and then you can go into your add-ons, and then start searching for GLTF, and then there we go, our Import Export. We want to make sure that this is checked off. And then you can go down here and say Save Preferences, and then shut it down. If you don't have the OBJ import, actually, I think by default that's turned on. but when I imported this for the first time, if you didn't see that option, or if it was grayed out, you might want to double check that under Preferences, your Obj Import Export. So that's under Add-ons. You can search for OBJ. And then you want to make sure that Wavefront OBJ format is checked off. All right, so now I'm going to export this. I'm going to say File, Export, and I'm going to show you the settings that have consistently worked for me when I've included things like animations and other various kind of data files. For this, it's just the color data that we're kind of like packaging, so it's not as complex, but this is just the file format that works for me with New Art City. So I'm going to use the GLTF embedded. I'm going to include the selected object, and that means that, like, if I forgot to delete a camera or something or a light, it won't export it with my object. The transform, default Y up, geometry, UVs, normals, all the defaults are good, and then we're not using any animation, so I don't need to check. I don't need any of the animation data. That will make a much larger file than I actually need. So I'm going to say, name this NRH Genome Living Room, and then I want to put it back in that folder that I made. All right, and now that's done. I can check the file. It's 11 megabytes, so in New Art City, I'll bring that edit window down. In New Art City, you can see that we're kind of we're shooting optimally for under 40 megabytes. That's really for mobile. So that's something that we will want to consider. How big? For now, I think 11 is fine, and I'll show you how to kind of reduce file sizes after I go through the workflow here. So this is the room. We can go into and preview it. Right now, there's nothing in the room, so I think that I might have some JavaScript running that kind of has turned off the lights, which maybe I should put a floor back on. We'll put a dark floor, and I'll have to remember to turn on some lights again, or comment out the code that's making it dark. I'm going to say upload now. And it's going to go into our folder, downloads, and I'm going to import that GLTF. Okay, and so now in this little preview window, we should be able to see, there we go, image textures are importing with our model. I can say living room and artist name, description, so like when you hover over something, and then alt text. This gets used in the 2D view for like screen readers. I would just say like 3D scan of Rhonda's living room, concrete floor, jute, rug, woven storage. Very California. I don't know how to spell jute. That's fine. We can fix this later. And then you can create like an outbound link. Like if you click on something, it will take you to that link. If you wanted to change, I'll show the image texture. The position data and scale, I'm just going to leave defaults for now. And then I can go into my preview and check it out. It's going to be a dark room. I'm realizing because I have turned off the hemisphere, so I might, oh, well, it is showing up, so that's great. So, oh yeah, I have these little JavaScript. Forgot. Oh yeah, and that cube is being created by JavaScript, even though I deleted everything else out there. That's fine. So here is the scan, the inside of my sofa, inside of that storage basket and the yoga mats. So that is the basics of uploading. I think I'd probably want to, make it a little bit smaller. Feels like a little bit, like I'm kind of, or like maybe move it in space. So you can see the center of the screen. There's that little pointer icon. If you click on the object, you can get those transform handles. So here you can kind of like move your object in space. If you right click or control click, you'll get like handles for rotation, and then you get handles again for scale. The editor is getting a lot better and a lot easier to use, but I like to kind of scale everything in Blender first, and then don't kind of like, especially if we're all adding, different files, it just makes it easier to have like a common thing to scale to. So we might want to come up with like a cube that we all like, say it's like human size or something, and then scale around. But we can also kind of, riff off of one another's objects. Okay, so that is the file upload process. I think New Art City is, let me go back, I'm going to hit escape, and then we're brought back to their kind of default screen. You can take screenshots here. The catalog view that I mentioned, this is where that kind of alt text becomes really important, although I'm not seeing it here. Interesting. So, maybe it's the alt text gets like read as like over this preview. I'm kind of like not as familiar with New Art City's updates for the catalog view recently. But you can kind of see, in this catalog view, these little previews, and then every artwork that gets uploaded will have a 2D entry, which is really nice. I'm going to go back out into my editor. So the preview, you can see if you're editing, the preview will be kind of the very similar link. It will say preview, and then when we publish, it will become public under this /show URL. But in the editor tab, let's go back and check out living room. Yeah, so actually New Art City did some kind of default optimization already, right? Like it's almost like half the size that the GLTF that this package was. So we might not want to do, too much compression out of Blender, and just kind of let the New Art City handle the compression settings. All right, that is that. So I'm gonna sign off for now. I'll include, this will finally get kind of, cut together with some instructions on the 3D scanning process itself. But I will, I hope this is useful, and I will see you soon. Okay, take care. Bye.